Graham, a human hero, is fighting Veltal Velvet Velsvault, a powerful demon lord, in a magical world called Almieth. Humans in Almieth have a limited lifespan, while demons can cheat death and come back to life. This gives the demons a huge advantage. However, Graham has a special sword that can hurt even immortal beings. In a fierce battle, Graham uses this sword to strike Veltal so hard that the demon lord can't come back to life, even with his cheat. This unexpected victory could change the war's course and give the humans a chance to defeat the immortal demons. Veltal couldn't help but praise the hero for defeating him, but he was still salty about losing to Immortal, so in his final moments he swore that he would return to get his revenge, and with that, he vanished from the world. Years later, Veltal awakens once more and is greeted by one of his loyal servants, Makina. She kneels before him and says she has patiently waited 500 years for the day that he would return, and she apologizes for having to attend to him in such informal attire. But Veltal says he doesn't mind, he's just glad she performed his reincarnation ritual and brought him back to life. But with that said, he has no clue where they are and wants to begin his conquest of Almieth once more. However, about that, Makina tells him a lot of stuff happened in the 500 years since his death, and Almieth has gone through some major changes. Around 80 years ago, Almieth and Earth were caught in a major catastrophe, which caused the two worlds to fuse with one another. The war was devastating, killing almost everyone and destroying governments. Cities became their own countries, and there were some fights between them, but now things are mostly calm. Earth and Almieth, worlds with super advanced tech and magic, merged, making things even more amazing. Makina, a guide from this new world, shows Veltal around. Veltal is so shocked by how much the world has changed that he almost crashes into someone. Makina has to save him from embarrassment. He apologizes to her for letting himself get distracted, but he can't believe that man, one of the 6 dark peers. It's almost as if they don't know or care who she is, so Veltal is prepared to instill a new sense of fear into these foolish mortals. He raises his hand to the sky, and Makina already knows what he's about to do, so she tries to tell him it's not a good idea, but it's already too late, as he has already fired his spell into the sky and created a massive hole in the cloud cover. In an anticlimactic turn of events, people seem more annoyed than scared by the fact that someone was dumb enough to use magic in the city, and an alarm goes off soon after. So Makina explains that it is forbidden to use grand magic within the city, and they have to get out of there before they get in trouble. Veltal doesn't understand why he has to do something as cowardly as running away, but since Makina insists, he goes along with her. However, as they are leaving, Veltal notices someone who looks a lot like the hero Graham. He has no time to confront the man, as Makina continues to drag him away. After they're safe, Makina explains that after Veltal's death, the immortal demons had to agree to stop fighting the humans. When the two worlds merged 80 years ago, the immortal demons were forced to hide. People in the new world thought they didn't deserve the same rights as humans, so they started hunting them down. Veltal is shocked to hear this. At first it wasn't that bad, but then people developed anti-immortal weaponry, and from that point on, immortals were killed on sight, to the point of near extinction. It takes a few moments for Veltal to process that his people have been wiped out, but once he comes to terms with it, he asks Makina if she knows what happened to the other 5 dark peers. The whereabouts of May, Silvald, and Ralsine are all unknown, but sadly, Xenol is confirmed to be dead. He sacrificed himself and acted as a decoy so Makina could escape from the hunters. And he said he was doing it for the sake of Veltal, because aside from Ralchine, Makina was the only other person capable of performing Veltal's reincarnation ritual. Veltal had always been a loyal follower of Veltal, so he is grateful to have had such a good subordinate. Veltal notices that Makina hasn't mentioned anything about Marcus yet, so he asks her directly about him. Makina doesn't seem to want to talk about Marcus, so she quickly tries to change the topic. She asks Veltal if he's thirsty, but Veltal says he isn't. Undeterred, Makina makes up an excuse and tells him that he really should drink something. She insists that he wait where he is while she goes to buy something for him. As she leaves, Veltal stands there, looking around. Suddenly, he notices a YouTuber streaming on some of the huge billboards nearby. Veltal feels confused, wondering what exactly this stream is supposed to be. He doesn't get it, and the whole thing seems strange to him. But he just watches for a moment, still not sure what's going on. But then he notices several lights flowing around the area, and it seems to be caused by this one girl on a roof near the billboards. It's not clear what she's doing at first, but then she flicks her wrist, and in an instant, all the billboards start playing hub videos. The girl seems pretty pleased with herself, and no one knows she's the one who did it, so she starts walking away. But as she is leaving, Veltol calls out to her, and she panics a little because she just got caught. She tries pretending that she's not involved in any way, but Veltol clearly saw her do something with the surrounding ether, and then all of a sudden the screens changed. She can't believe someone was perceptive enough to figure out what she did based on the surrounding ether alone. So she asks Veltol who he is, although she doesn't take him seriously when he says he's the demon lord. Veltol explains that he knows she did something to the giant picture screens, but he doesn't understand the principle behind it, so he would like to learn about it from an expert like her. The girl smiles, clearly flattered that Veltol thinks she's an expert on the subject. She starts explaining, saying that this kind of hacking is really simple. Compared to some of her bigger jobs, like leaking the Pokemon files, this was nothing. All she did was take advantage of a major flaw in Billboard's logic barrier, and then she slipped in some spicy videos just for fun. As she goes on about the hack, Veltol cuts her off, his expression serious. He tells her he's looking for one of his subordinates named Marcus and asks if she knows where he can find him. The girl pauses for a second and points toward the massive tower in the middle of the city. She says the CEO of that company is named Marcus, so if Veltol heads there, he might be able to find him. Veltol nods, taking her advice to heart, and starts making his way toward Heavy Magic Industries, hoping to track down Marcus. As he enters, he spots this weird-looking thing wiggling at him, but he ignores it and heads to the front desk. He tells the receptionist that he is here looking for Marcus, but before he's even done speaking, Marcus's private secretary comes down and says she is here to bring Veltol to Marcus. They both get on an elevator headed to the top of the tower, and while they go up, Veltol notices that the secretary has a pin of that thing he saw when he came in, so he asks what that's about. She proudly exclaims that this is the mascot of the company, and they plan to create a brand around it shortly. Eventually, Veltol arrives at the top of the tower, where he finds Marcus sitting atop his throne. Marcus says it has been a long time since he last saw Veltol, but Veltol finds it disrespectful that Marcus is remaining seated while in the presence of his king. Marcus ignores him and asks what business he has here. Veltol, standing tall and confident, tells Marcus that he wants his help to rebuild the immortal kingdom. Marcus bursts into laughter, mocking him for a solid minute. His laughter echoes through the room, and when he finally stops, he looks at Veltol with a smirk and says, in a mocking tone, that he won't be helping him with that. Veltol feels his pride wounded by the insult, his anger rising. He gets ready to teach Marcus a painful lesson in respect, his hands already forming the spell he plans to cast. But before he can make his move, Marcus's assistant, a woman, strikes him with a blade, forcing him to dodge quickly to avoid being hit. Veltol is stunned by her speed and skill, especially since she is using armament forging magic, a technique he hadn't expected from her. However, before she can strike again, Marcus raises a hand and commands her to stand down. He turns back to Veltol, his expression turning serious. With a condescending tone, he tells Veltol that he has grown weak, saying that in his prime, Veltol would never have felt threatened by the magic of that level. How exactly does he intend to take over the world if a single human can give him so much trouble? Marcus refuses to serve a king who is so pitiful, so he tells Veltol to get out of his sight before he forces him. Veltol is enraged and begins casting his spell to take Marcus down, but before he can finish, Marcus has already cast his spellbreaker, and Veltol is left in shock because Marcus was never gifted enough to outclass him in spell casting. Marcus has been waiting for this moment for a long time, and he takes great pleasure in telling Veltol that his strength is nothing more than a thing of the past. With a satisfied smile, he reveals an implant on the back of his neck. Veltol doesn't know what it is, so Marcus, eager to explain, pulls up a video on a nearby screen. The video explains everything about the implant. It's called a familia, and it's a game changer when it comes to using magic. Normally, using magic requires a complicated 5-step process: initialization, construction, expansion, incantation, and proclamation. But with the familia implant, people can skip 3 of those steps. This makes it possible for anyone, literally anyone, to use magic at a high level. Marcus smirks and adds that if Veltol is thinking of getting a familia implant for himself, he's wasting his time. He specifically designed the device so it wouldn't work for higher beings like Veltol. That means he can never use a familia, and while his natural spellcasting speed is superhuman compared to AI spellcasting, he might as well be sending his spells by mail. Veltol asks why Marcus is doing all of this. Marcus reveals that he had never liked Veltol from the very day they met. He was tyrannical and arrogant, And worst of all, he had the skills to warn his arrogance, so Marcus could never oppose him back then. But that all changes now. He tells Veltol that it's about time for him to leave, so Marcus launches several bloody swords at him. Veltol isn't able to dodge all of them, so he ends up getting stabbed several times and launched out of the window. Marcus has always wanted to do that, and now that he has finally triumphed over Veltol, he declares that he is the new Demon Lord. But all that aside, his secretary really wants to discuss the promotional ideas she has for the company mascot, so Marcus tells her to submit her ideas at the next planning meeting. Meanwhile, Veltol has crash-landed back into the city, and his regeneration is far slower than it used to be, so he's having a hard time recovering from his injury. He tries to walk out into the street, but he accidentally bumps into someone, and as a result, he gets into a fight that he immediately loses. Now look at him, laid out in a pile of trash, wondering why he keeps losing to mortals like he lost to Graham until Machina eventually finds him. Machina gets Veltol onto a train and starts to apologize for not telling him sooner about Marcus' betrayal. She feels bad because her hesitation led to him being dishonored and hurt. Veltol stops her, saying there's no reason to apologize. He tells her that even if she had told him earlier, he still would have wanted to find out the truth for himself. As the train finally stops, Machina guides Veltol to her apartment building and tells him it's her home. Veltol, assuming she means the entire building belongs to her, is surprised when Machina leads him to a small room. She explains that this is where she really lives. Veltol is a little confused at first and thinks she might be joking, but Machina is serious. She tells him this tiny room is all she can afford with her salary, and there's nothing more to it. Veltol realizes she has been living like this all this time while waiting for his return, so he pulls her close and thanks her, because he will never forget the loyalty she has shown him centuries ago. Machina was being persecuted by the people of her time because after they found out that she was immortal, they naturally blamed her for all their problems and decided that the best course of action would be to throw her into a volcano. However, before Machina could hit the lava, Veltol appeared out of nowhere to save her. This was their first time meeting, and the only reason Veltol came was because he heard there was another immortal like him in the area. After seeing Machina for the first time, he was not disappointed. He extended an offer to her to devote her body and soul to him, and from that day forward, Machina has remained loyal to Veltol. Machina wakes up to the sound of her alarm and gets out of bed quietly, making sure not to wake Veltol. She heads straight to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. While waiting for the soup to boil, she calls on her virtual assistant, aniplot. A tiny version of aniplot appears in her field of view, and it gives her an update on the date, time, and weather conditions. After hearing the details, Machina asks aniplot how she's doing today, but aniplot starts running a full diagnostic check on her systems. It reports that everything is in perfect working order, which is good, but that's not exactly what Machina meant. Satisfied with the results, she finishes preparing the breakfast. Once everything is ready, she goes to wake Veltol up and serves him the meal. Veltol looks at the food, not recognizing what it is, but as soon as he smells it, he knows it's going to taste amazing. He picks up the chopsticks to try it, and sure enough, he loves the food Machina made for him, and hearing it makes her extremely happy. Once he is done eating, Veltol asks if Machina knows the location of any other immortals, and she does know a few other immortals who managed to escape the immortal hunts. But recently, immortals have been going missing, and Machina has even lost contact with two of her close aides, Warner and Pomwak. She hopes they just went into hiding, but with no way of contacting them, she can't be sure. Veltol asks if immortal hunts still happen, but she answers that the hunts actually ended decades ago. The hunts were started by Marcus to secure his position at the top, and now that he has all the power, he has no reason to continue. The resentment people had towards immortals has also dwindled over the years, so it's not particularly dangerous to be seen outside. After Machina's aides went missing, she went to their apartment to check up on them, and the place was a mess. So she assumes a fight happened, but the only clue she could find was this note with the words "Immortal Furnace" written on it. As Veltol reads the message, he reaches for his cup of tea, but suddenly, a sharp pain shoots through his body, making him flinch. The pain is so intense that he spills the tea everywhere. He quickly realizes that he still hasn't fully healed from the injuries he took the day before. It isn't just his wounds that are still hurting. It feels like everything about him is weaker than it was before. His regeneration isn't working as fast, and even the magic he used to be able to cast so easily doesn't have the same impact now. If he were at full strength, that spell he used when he first arrived would have been much more powerful. Makina, watching all of this, guesses that the reason for his weakness is that the faith he once relied on for his power is no longer there. That faith, which helped fuel his strength in his prime, is gone, and without it, Veltol isn't the same as he once was. As of now, he's only spoken of in history books without recognition. Veltol's powers will never truly return to him, but he thinks that should be easy enough to solve, as he just has to make himself known once more. With that said, he tells Makina that he wants to head out and explore the surrounding area, since sitting around all day would be bad for him. So Makina suggests that the two of them should go shopping out in the city. The first thing they should do is get Veltol a set of good street clothes. They enter a store, and Makina asks Veltol to step onto a platform so the machine can take a 3D scan of his body. She apologizes for having to stick to cheaper clothes because of her budget, but Veltol reassures her that he doesn't mind at all. He says his natural beauty would make anything look good on him. After the machine finishes taking his measurements, Makina asks if he has any clothing preferences. Veltol, unfamiliar with the fashion of this era, says he doesn't really know what's in style, so he leaves the decision to her. Makina, not wanting to choose her own, decides to ask her virtual assistant, yahello, to pick the most practical and cost-effective option for him. After a few moments of processing, yahello suggests a tracksuit. Makina hesitates at first, unsure if that's the right choice, but when Veltol sees it, he immediately loves how it looks. He is especially intrigued by the unique design on the back, which only adds to his excitement. Makina explains it's an old language used by the people who used to live on this land, and the symbols on the jacket spell out Demon Lord. Since Veltol seems to like it, she takes the tracksuit for him and walks out of the store, but before she leaves, he gets her attention because they haven't paid for it yet. However, Makina explains that all transactions are performed automatically. After that, they have some food at a fast food joint, and while they are sitting together, Veltol asks Makina what it's like to have a familia installed. Marcus' betrayal aside, the familia is without a doubt a revolutionary device, so he is curious about it. Makina explains that it is really convenient since it not only allows for easier use of magic, but it can also be used to gather information, go shopping, or even communicate. Before familias were mainstream, people had smartphones to do these things, but it was really inconvenient to have to hold them. Veltol asks her to let him see it, so he turns her around and begins touching it. Makina is a little startled at first, but she's actually really enjoying this, so much so that her familia has to warn her that her heart rate just spiked. Once he is done inspecting it, Veltol asks her if it isn't uncomfortable having the familia installed in the nape of her neck, and while it felt strange at first, she got used to it. Once it became illegal for companies to stream ads straight into people's heads, it's difficult to live daily life without one of these. But at the same time, having a familia doesn't necessarily make your life better, as shown by her current living situation. As they walk home, Veltol makes a declaration that he will get a job. Makina is taken aback and tells Veltol that he doesn't need to do something as lowly as working. Her living conditions may be suboptimal right now, but she assures him that she will provide a better lifestyle for him. She says she will just pick up more shifts or maybe even get 2 or 3 more jobs, but Veltol interrupts her and says that times have changed. He's no longer the omnipotent god he once was, so he needs to adapt to the current circumstances. And most importantly, he wouldn't feel right if he just sat back and did nothing while Makina worked to provide him with food, clothing, and shelter. Without his duties as king to occupy him, he would need to take up labor. But that does not mean he has given up on conquering the world. He asks Makina if she's willing to continue to serve him, and Makina swears to be by his side for the rest of her life. Later that day, Veltol is getting ready to head out to look for a job, but Makina stops him, insisting that she won't let him go alone because she's worried about him. Veltol tries to reassure her, telling her that she can't come with him since she has her own job to take care of. Makina, however, says she can just call off work for the day to accompany him. Veltol firmly refuses, reminding her that if he doesn't find a job, he'll have to rely on her income. He says she can't afford to skip work just for him. After a moment of hesitation, Makina reluctantly agrees to let him go alone. However, for his safety, she hands him a small device, which has a little bit of money loaded onto it in case of emergencies. The device also has an emergency contact feature. If anything goes wrong, Veltol can use it to reach her, and she promises she'll rush over to help as soon as possible. He realizes that she is worried about him, but the extent she is going to just makes him feel like a child. Still, even though he said he wanted to go by himself, he didn't have a clue what kinds of jobs were available or how to get one. He's also starting to get hungry, so he can't afford to be picky about it unless he wants to end up begging on the street. He gets up and yells out that he has no money and is looking for a job. But as he is yelling, one guy comes up to him and tells him to stop. He says if Veltol wants work, he should go to the commercial guild with his citizen ID, but Veltol has never heard of a citizen ID. So the guy assumes he must be an immigrant since it's clear that Veltol doesn't know anything about the city. The man informs him that this is his turf, so Veltol can't be doing stuff like this out here. Veltol hadn't realized he was encroaching on someone else's territory, so he apologizes and turns to leave, but before he does, the man hands him an application form and tells him to take it to the commercial guild so he can apply for a job there. It won't guarantee that he gets anything, but it's better than having nothing. Also, he warns Veltol not to get involved with any companies under the IHNI company, especially construction-related, because they are incredibly exploitative and laugh in the face of safety regulations. Veltol takes the man's advice and thanks him before heading to the commercial guild to look for work. However, when he meets the interviewer, things don't go as he hoped. The interviewer takes one look at his application, which lists skills like wide-scale annihilation magic, dungeon creation, and leading a nation 500 years ago, and the man's reaction is less than impressive. He calmly sets down Veltol's application and tells him there are no positions available for someone with his qualifications. On top of that, because Veltol doesn't have a familia, he's not eligible to be hired at all. Veltol, feeling down and discouraged, returns home later that day. He's frustrated and depressed, not sure what to do next. He lies down on Makina's lap, feeling lost, and asks her if he's really just incapable of doing anything in this world anymore. But she assures him that he is still superior to everyone else, so she tells him he should just let her do the work from now on. However, Veltol refuses to sit idle, so he asks Makina if there's anyone she can contact for assistance. Now that she thinks about it, there is someone she can call. Veltol is surprised that Makina actually has a friend in this era, but Makina wouldn't exactly call the person a friend. They do go shopping together, eat, play, and sleep over sometimes, but that's about it. Veltol is confused because they sound exactly like a friend to him, but Makina still refuses to acknowledge it. A little while later, they meet Makina's friend in a nearby cafe, and it turns out to be a hacker girl Veltol had met yesterday. She introduces herself properly to Veltol and says her name is Takahashi. But even though Makina had mentioned how the great demon lord would one day be revived, she never actually thought she would be able to meet him in the flesh. She starts poking Veltol to make sure he is real, and Makina yells at her not to be disrespectful, but Veltol says it's fine since he is the one asking her for assistance here. Veltol is curious about how Takahashi and Makina met, so he asks them. Takahashi starts to explain that she met Makina on a do-one site, but as she notices the look on Makina's face, she quickly realizes that mentioning Makina's search history might not be a good idea. She quickly tells Veltol to forget she said anything about it. Just then, Veltol notices the familia on Takahashi's neck and reaches over to take a closer look. This startles Takahashi at first, but she doesn't stop him, letting him finish his inspection. Veltol then apologizes, saying he didn't mean to scare her. He just noticed that Takahashi's familia is different from Makina's, and he wanted to understand how it works and how it's built. Takahashi is surprised that Veltol can figure all of that out just by touching it, so Makina explains that Veltol has a special ability called the Sage Eye. This ability lets him sense the flow of mana in any object he touches, which helps him understand its composition and structure. He has a general idea of how a familia works, but there are still a lot of components he can't fully analyze yet. However, that's a problem for another day, because the reason they are here right now is to ask if Takahashi can introduce Veltol to some kind of work. She asks why Veltol doesn't just go to the commercial guild, but he already tried that and they rejected him for not having a familia. And due to certain CDOs and vendetta against him, Veltol can't have a familia installed, so they were hoping Takahashi would have some ideas. Takahashi thinks about it for a second, and Veltol is a young-looking 500-year-old demon lord with a great voice, a handsome face, and no familia. Yeah, there's only one clear option available, so it has been decided that Veltol will become a streamer. Takahashi explains that streamers post videos of themselves doing stuff online, for which they receive money from ad revenue or donations. She even has some leftover equipment from when she used to stream, although it will be a little outdated. But if he becomes popular, he can just buy new equipment for himself. Makina says she is firmly against the idea of Veltol becoming a streamer because the job is extremely unstable and risky. She thinks it would be much better if he got a reliable job like flipping burgers, but Takahashi thinks this could be a great opportunity for him. Veltol has a great voice, great looks, and an incredible aura, so he fits all the markers for becoming a star. And when she puts it like that, Makina can't deny that Veltol is charming, but she still isn't sure this is a good idea. There are some games he wouldn't be able to play without a familia, but he could always just stick to the games that still use physical controls. And most people don't even watch because of the game anymore, they just watch to see Veltol do stuff. Makina asks him what he thinks about all this, and given the fact that he doesn't have many options available to him, he agrees to go along with Takahashi's idea. Later that day, Makina decides to take a bath while Veltol sits nearby and does some research on the internet in this world. It doesn't take him long to understand how it works. He realizes that the internet makes it possible for people to spread information faster than anything he's ever seen before. However, he also notices that most people just watch cat videos or waste time doing things online that aren't very productive. Veltol figures that with this kind of access, it will be easy for him to influence the public and get them to support him. Just as he's thinking about this, Makina finishes her bath and walks out of the bathroom completely naked. When she realizes what happened, she quickly gets dressed and apologizes to Veltol, feeling embarrassed. She explains that she has lived alone for so long that she just got used to walking around without thinking about it. Veltol, however, tells her that there's no need to apologize because he actually thinks her body is quite beautiful. Even so, he adds with a smile that he still thinks his own body is better. A couple of hours later, Takahashi arrived at Makina's house with all her old equipment so she could help Veltol set it up. And once it's done, she hands him the controller so he can try out some games. She tries explaining the controls to him, but Veltol tells her there's no need since he already knows exactly how it works. Something like this is much easier to analyze than a familia, so he starts scrolling through the game library and selects Bloodborne. Takahashi remembers how so many people rage quit because the game was too difficult, but she's sure Veltol's analysis skills will make this easy for him. However, as Veltol starts the game, he finds that he can't even get past the introduction. It's a lot harder than he thought it would be, and even after playing for several hours, he hasn't made much progress. Takahashi, not holding back, bluntly tells him that he's not good at it. Makina, feeling a bit uncomfortable, thinks Takahashi is being rude, but Veltol isn't upset. He knows that he's not doing well. He understands the game mechanics, but he just can't seem to get the hang of it. Makina starts to feel a little worried that Veltol might not be able to stream after all. But Takahashi has a different perspective. She believes that Veltol's struggles will actually work in his favor for his online image. According to her, the internet loves a handsome guy, but what the internet loves even more is a handsome guy who tries confidently and fails in an entertaining way. But before that, Takahashi says they need to work on Veltol's introductory greeting. Veltol asks if he can just introduce himself normally, but Takahashi tells him that that's not an option. There are already over 5 million streamers in the world, and barely 1% of those streamers actually make enough money to survive. So if Veltol wants to get into the business, he has to think of a way to leave an impression on as many people as possible with his greeting. Takahashi seems to think the greeting is a really big deal, so Veltol asks Makina if she has any ideas on what he could use as a greeting. Makina thinks about it for a second, and she thinks it would be best if he just adapted one of his warden declarations and used that. Veltol gives it a try, and the declaration is basically him telling the foolish mortals that they should be honored to be in his presence, and it's dramatic. So Takahashi thinks it's a good start, but it still isn't very attention-grabbing, so they will have to think of something to add to it. In the meantime, Takahashi says she will give Veltol a crash course on everything he needs to know about streaming. Basically, Veltol is going to need to stream every single day, even if no one is watching, and no matter what, he has to make sure to avoid talking about anything inappropriate, like anything sexual or racist, because that will get him banned faster than he can blink. The most important thing, though, is that while he's streaming, Makina has to make sure she's never on camera. They don't want people to think she's his girlfriend. As a kind gesture, Takahashi asks one of her friends to help promote Veltol's stream, but she makes it clear that her friend owes her a favor after this. Days pass, and Veltol starts gaining more and more viewers. His popularity grows slowly but surely. However, when the trolls inevitably start flooding his stream, Veltol remains completely unfazed. In fact, he even encourages them to keep roasting him. having fun with the situation instead of getting upset about it. It doesn't matter to him since he gains power from having others think about him, so even negative publicity works out in his favor. Before long, through hard work and determination, Veltal reached 1 million views, and for his latest stream, he will be playing Bloodborne 3 non-stop until he clears it. However, while he does this, there's a camera being pointed at Machina's house, and it captures the moment Machina gets home from work. As Machina enters, Veltal has just successfully cleared the game, so he is celebrating his victory, and many of his fans are congratulating him on it. He's improved a lot after finishing the first and second Bloodborne games, but this was still insanely difficult to beat, and he's glad he got through it. Veltal thanks all his fans and the haters who stuck with him until the end of his stream, but he tells them that it's time for him to wrap things up for today. After the stream ends, he lets out a deep breath of relief, feeling like he can finally relax. Just then, Machina opens the door to check on him and see if he needs anything. Veltal says he's fine, but he's planning to go out to pick up a package. Machina offers to get it for him, but Veltal has been looking for an excuse to get out and move around, so he says he'll go himself. Machina agrees and tells him she'll have dinner ready by the time he gets back. Veltal heads out into the city, walking through the slums. As he walks, he reflects on how messed up the social structures are in the city and how things are all twisted and broken. But as he continues on his way, something unexpected happens. He spots someone familiar sitting on the side of the road, Hero Graham. Veltal is shocked, unsure of how or why he's here, but there's no mistaking that face. Back in the day, Graham was a kind brother and was taking care of his little sister Melina, who had fallen ill. He comforted her and said he would head out to gather some medicinal herbs to help her recover. But as he was about to leave, his father called out to him and handed him a sword. He had heard that there were monsters active in the forest, so he wanted Graham to take the sword so he could protect himself if he ran into anything dangerous. His mother is also worried about his safety, so she says a small prayer for him before he leaves, and Graham thanks both of them for their consideration. He went out into the forest that day and the herb gathering went smoothly. But as he was returning home, he ran into an army of lizardmen under the leadership of Zinol, one of El's generals. Veltal is surprised to see Graham sitting there, and as he looks at him, he remembers what happened in the past. He knows that Graham's family and home were destroyed, and he can tell that Graham's anger toward him is deep. However, right now, Graham looks lost and dazed, almost like he's not fully present. Veltal tries to break the silence by talking about the udon shop they're at, telling Graham that it's one of the best places around. Graham doesn't really respond to that. Trying to keep the conversation going, Veltal mentions how the food in this world is way better than it was when he was around, and Graham nods in agreement, but he still doesn't seem to have much to say. The tension between them hangs in the air, and Veltal can tell that, despite the peaceful setting, Graham is still far from being at ease, even if he's sitting right next to his enemy. The food finally arrives, and they are both about to eat, but Graham finally says something and talks about how strange it feels to be slurping noodles while seated next to the enemy who killed his family and friends. Veltal feels the same way since Graham single-handedly killed several of El's vassals, but right now, he bears no hatred toward Graham at all. He's just curious to know how Graham managed to survive this long when he's immortal. The only explanation would be if Graham somehow became immortal, but that would go against his entire ideology of making the most out of a limited lifespan. Graham explains that he didn't give up his mortality. Rather, as a reward for defeating Veltal, the goddess Melia gifted him with the blessing of eternal youth. And while that blessing has allowed him to live this long, it doesn't make him immortal. Veltal comments that goddess Melia must have been quite fond of him, so he can imagine her granting him such a blessing. After Graham ended the war with the immortals began starting wars among themselves again. So if he was ordered to go out to the battlefield and slay the same mortals he had once fought to save, and even after the civil war had ended, the people turned their hatred towards Graham for some reason. Veltal thinks about Graham's situation and believes that in the end, it is always going to turn out this way. People are always afraid of those with great power, and that fear often leads to exile or rejection. Graham was exiled from his kingdom, and since then, he's wandered the world, losing his sense of purpose as the centuries passed. When Fantasian happened and the worlds merged, things only got worse for him. Over time, Graham has killed countless mortals and immortals, and now he feels like there's no place left for him to be the hero he once was. Graham asks Veltal why he ever wanted to rule the world, and Veltal answers honestly, saying that his goal was always world peace. Veltal explains that immortals can become immortal in different ways, whether through phoenix rebirth, curses, or blessings, and that, aside from a few rare cases, every immortal was once mortal. This idea helps Veltal understand the balance between life and death, and why so many beings like Graham are lost in the middle of it all. Still, mortals constantly ostracized and persecuted immortals because they were different, and the immortals were no better because they did the exact same thing to the mortals. The lesson Veltal took from this was that no matter what you are, people will always hate and fear that which is different. So he believed that the only way to bring about world peace was to stand at the top of the world and rule it, to make sure no one had to suffer such persecution. Graham doesn't believe peace through world domination would work, but he also can't deny that people left on their own will never achieve peace because he has experienced the senseless persecution and wars firsthand. Even so, he still refuses to admit that Veltal is right. So Veltal accepts that Graham will never agree with him. Graham gets up to leave and thanks Veltal for the noodles, but before he goes, he tells Veltal that he is glad he got the chance to speak with him. Veltal gets up to leave as well, and while walking down the street, he notices Takahashi down in an alley, and she seems to be in some kind of trouble. She apparently hired this ogre for a job, but now he's trying to extort twice the pay from her. Takahashi tells him he's stupid if he thinks she's going to give him that much money, but the ogre is totally prepared to beat her up if he doesn't get what he wants. Veltal is surprised to hear that immortal demons are being hunted. A big mean guy tries to hurt Machina, but Veltal stops him. The big guy recognizes Veltal and isn't scared. He wants to fight Veltal again. Machina tells Veltal to run, but he wants to fight. He thinks he's strong enough now. The big guy punches Veltal, but Veltal catches his fist. Then the big guy uses magic to break Veltal's arm. However, with his powers partially restored, Veltal can regenerate his arm instantly and flicks the ogre into a pile of trash. The guy's out cold, and Veltal is honestly disappointed since he was expecting more of a fight. Takahashi comes up to him and asks if he is alright, and Veltal says he is perfectly fine. But he wants to know who that guy is and why he was attacking her. Takahashi explains that he was supposed to be her bodyguard for a big job today, but all of a sudden, he started making ridiculous demands. He didn't know the guy was supposed to be her bodyguard, so he apologized for knocking him out, but Takahashi said it was alright since she just found someone even better. Takahashi needs help stealing something from a big building. She asks Veltal to be her bodyguard and distract the guards. Veltal agrees because he owes her. Takahashi explains the plan, but Veltal kicks down the door before she can finish. He's not sure what to do next, so he asks Takahashi if a special box is what they want. She says yes, but she's confused because he doesn't have a magic group like hers. Veltal explains that he copied their magic trick to talk to her. Anyway, since there aren't that many enemies here, Vil says he will subdue them and claim the cube for Takahashi. But before he does anything, she asks him to make sure he doesn't kill anyone. Veltal agrees to hold back, so before the fight begins, he announces himself using his stream greeting. However, none of the Yakuza members have seen his stream, so it just makes things really awkward. If there are still people who don't recognize him, Veltal is going to have to work a lot harder to make his name known. But for now, his million subscribers worth of power should be more than enough to take these guys down. The Yakuza are still confused about what's going on, but they assume Veltal must just be some crazy guy. So one of them pulls out a magic gun and fires it at him. However, Veltal isn't fazed by this and uses strengthening magic on himself so he can deflect the bullets. Once the Yakuza member runs out of ammo, Phil goes on the offensive and begins knocking the Yakuza members out one after the other with minimal effort. The bad guy with the magic gun switches to a regular gun because it's faster. But Takahashi tricks him into shooting his own friend. Veltal knocks out the last bad guy. They look at the bad guy's gun, which uses special cards as bullets. Takahashi is impressed, but they need to leave before more trouble comes. Just then, a big invisible robot attacks Veltal. Takahashi realizes it's a very expensive robot suit, not something the bad guys would have. This is a serious problem. They need to figure out who sent this robot and why they want to stop them. This is the first time Veltal has ever seen something like this before, and he is eager to test his strength against it. So he begins by firing the magic gun. Predictably, the magic gun does absolutely nothing against the giant mech, but the assailant decides to follow Vel's lead and pulls out a magic gun of his own. But his is a lot more powerful. He tries to shoot Veltal, but Veltal is too quick for him and manages to sneak into a blind spot above the mech. By the time the assailant finally locates and locks onto him, Veltol is already in position and fires a powerful blast of his straight at the mech. At full power, he could have easily one-shot the mech, but while Veltol's blast was certainly strong at his current power level, he knows it was nowhere near strong enough to defeat a foe like the mech. Although that doesn't mean he can't win this fight, because if blasts don't work, he will just have to go for close combat. So he summons a sword. The mech matches Veltol and converts its gun into a sword. So the two charge at each other and clash in a magnificent display of strength and animation budget. Veltol is having a blast fighting the mech, but the mech gets serious and cuts off Veltol's arm and head. The robot thinks it won, but Veltol's head starts talking. Veltol praises the robot's skills, but says he should have finished the job. He explains that even though he's headless, he can still use his magic. Veltol then uses a powerful spell to blow up the mech, killing the pilot inside. In any case, Veltol believes the guy deserves a reward for fighting so well, so Veltol says he will allow the mech pilot the honor of witnessing the strongest weapon within his arsenal. Its terrifying aura emanates as Veltol summons the great sword Vernal, and the mech pilot is so stunned that he can barely move. He's never fought anyone who possessed such strength, and he is completely defenseless as Veltol cuts his limbs off one by one until he falls to the ground with only one leg left. Veltol made sure to avoid hitting any vital organs, so the guy inside there should still be alive, and he plans to interrogate him. But before he does, the guy in the mech sends one final report back to HQ saying he failed to eliminate the target and failed to retrieve the objective. So he will now be executing code 890. And if you're wondering what 890 means, let's just say there was a gun installed in the helmet of the suit to make sure the pilot can't be interrogated. After that's over, Takahashi comes out of her hiding spot, and she's glad Veltol is alright. But it was really freaky to see him get his head chopped off. Although Veltol doesn't seem overly concerned about his injury, he's more surprised by the existence of such powerful weaponry that can boost someone's abilities to this extent. He remarks that this time period is truly terrifying because of the advanced technology and strength that can be wielded. However, Takahashi believes Veltol is actually the more terrifying figure in all of this. She points out that Veltol single-handedly destroyed a Magino gear, which is a highly advanced piece of technology. These gears are powerful enough to wipe out entire countries if needed, and the one Veltol destroyed was made by Marcus's company. Takahashi also knows that the Yakuza would never have been able to get their hands on such a suit, so she's starting to worry that this mission might be more complicated than she originally thought. Despite all the chaos, Veltol is still curious about the cubes they've been pursuing. Takahashi explains that the cube is actually a storage device, and her client is after the information inside it, not the cube itself. Takahashi says they can take a look at the data if Veltol wants, so she pulls out a cube reader and places the cube on it. At first, the only thing that appears is a blank page, but after a little tweaking from Takahashi, the cube opens up and a list of names appears on the list. Takahashi has no idea what to make of this list of names, but Veltol recognizes the people on this list to be his immortal subjects. This is concerning, so Takahashi says she will contact her client so she can find out what the list is about, but unfortunately her client isn't answering his phone, so they are going to have to go meet him in person if they want to discuss this. Takahashi leaves Veltol in the massive apartment building where her client is and says the guy they are looking for is up on the 13th floor. As they walk up to the front door, Takahashi uses her hacking skills to bypass the security system so they are allowed entry, even though they aren't residents here. And she is really proud of herself for it too, since there's no security system out there that she can't bypass. As Veltol and Takahashi get to the elevator, Takahashi is about to push the elevator button, but Veltol stops her and says he wants to do it instead. Takahashi doesn't mind letting him push the button, but she asks why he wants to do it, and Veltol doesn't really have a reason for it. He just likes pushing buttons. He began pushing the button for the 13th floor, but Takahashi forgot to mention that this elevator does not allow you to get to the 13th floor directly. First, you'd have to go to the 2nd floor, then the 17th, then back to the 4th, and so on until you eventually get to the 13th floor. Since they are here, Veltol starts walking out of the elevator, but Takahashi tells him to wait since her client Iju is a pretty paranoid guy, so he had dozens of traps laid across the entire floor. And if Veltol accidentally sets one of the traps off, he's going to become minced meat. Veltol appreciates the warning, but as far as he can tell, there are no traps in this room. However, it would be more accurate to say that all the physical and magical traps have been disarmed. Takahashi is surprised that Veltol could figure that out so easily, but part of his duties as Demon Lord included building and maintaining dungeons, so discerning the layout of traps is a trivial matter for him. They continue walking until they finally get to A's front door, and Takahashi rings the bell, but surprisingly he doesn't answer. Takahashi can understand Veltol ignoring phone calls, but she's surprised that he usually always answers his front door. However, as they approach, Veltol notices something odd. The door isn't even locked. This immediately raises a red flag for Takahashi, because Iju would never be careless enough to leave his front door unlocked. Sensing that something is off, Veltol suggests they proceed with caution, as they don't know what they might find inside. Takahashi, taking the lead, heads toward Iju's workroom. Once they enter, she spots Iju slumped in his chair, but when she gets closer, she's horrified to see that he's drenched in blood and completely lifeless. Takahashi panics for a moment, but Veltol quickly calms her down. He steps forward to inspect the body, his mind racing. He realizes he's seen this guy's face somewhere before. Although he was wearing a bunch of trash at the time, Takahashi says that sounds like something Iju would do, since he would often dress as a hobo whenever he went out to gather information. There's an obvious stab wound in Iju's chest, and another one in his neck, but judging from the state of the blood around him, Veltol assumes it has only been a few days since Iju was killed. A man like Iju has had many enemies, but the way he was murdered was too efficient for it to have been done out of hatred. It is way more likely that a hitman was hired to take Iju out, especially since the killer went through the effort of destroying Iju's familia. Someone must be trying to cover up whatever information Iju had. It probably had something to do with the job Takahashi accepted from him. But it's not like they can get any information from him now that he's dead. Takahashi thinks for a moment and starts searching around Iju's room. She knows that someone like Iju, a seasoned information broker, would definitely hide some kind of offline storage device nearby to keep his data secure. After rummaging through the room for a while, she finds a hidden drawer in his desk and discovers a laptop inside. This could be the key to finding out what happened. She powers it on, but to her frustration, the files on it appear to be corrupted. A chaotic mess of unreadable data. However, Veltol, ever observant, notices that the files are actually arranged in a very specific order. Takahashi, with a bit of effort, begins piecing them together, and after some time, she uncovers a video Iju made. It was recorded in case something happened to him before he could finish his investigation. Iju didn't know who would end up watching the video, but he wanted to ensure that at least one person would know the truth, and that truth was chilling. The prosperity of the city had been built upon terrifying evil. All the power in the city relies on the Aether reactor in the center of the city, but with the enormous scale of the city, the reactor would need at least 10 monolith lines to draw power from to meet the energy demands. The video continues, explaining that while there are only 2 ley lines in the area, the reactor always seems to have an endless supply of energy. This raises a troubling question. How is it possible for the reactor to keep running without running out of power? The answer becomes clear as Iju uncovers the existence of a secondary hidden power source. This source is called the Immortal Furnace Project. Essentially, the furnace burns the souls of immortals like fuel, converting the energy from their souls into Aether for the city. Since immortals are higher beings, their souls produce far more energy than the souls of countless mortals ever could. One immortal soul is enough to generate an immense amount of power. Iju's investigation reveals that Marcus's company used desperate homeless people as labor to build the immortal furnace. But once the construction was finished, those workers mysteriously disappeared. Iju believes they were all killed and sacrificed to the furnace, their souls used as fuel for the city's energy needs. The grim reality of what's happening behind the scenes is more horrifying than Iju could have ever imagined. One of the first immortals to be fed to the furnace was one of Vel's close subordinates, Zinol, and this greatly angered Veltol. The whole immortal hunt was a scheme by Marcus to turn the world against immortals, so people would accept their execution and he could burn immortal souls in the furnace. Although the public was never made aware that this was how he killed them, recently Marcus made a deal to buy information about some immortals from the Yakuza. And that probably means he's running low on immortal souls to burn, so he's looking for new victims. If a furnace runs out of fuel, the heart of the city would cease to exist as people know it. But even so, Iju thinks it's wrong that innocent immortals are being sacrificed to power the city. After the video ends, Takahashi is enraged by the revelation that immortals are being treated so badly. but there's not much she can do about it, since even if she were to try and publicize this information, it is likely she would just end up dead, just like Eiju. Veltal speaks up, reassuring Takahashi that this situation is something for immortals to handle, not humans. As the king of immortals, it's his responsibility to deal with the issue of the immortal furnace. He tells Takahashi not to worry about it, and that she doesn't need to carry the burden of solving this problem. For now, their immediate concern is Eiju's death, and they agree to inform the city officials so that Eiju can receive a proper burial and be treated with the respect he deserves. Machina looks in the fridge to see if there's anything new she can make for dinner while she waits for him to come back. But when she opens it, she finds that it's just the same old food, nothing has changed. She feels a bit disappointed, but remembers that Elikate told her she could probably make a good curry with what she has. As she thinks about that, the doorbell rings and she gets up to answer it, hoping it's someone else. But to her surprise and frustration, it's Marcus standing at the door. After everything Marcus has done, she can't help herself. She feels the only right thing to do is to fight him. Without hesitating, she unleashes a huge blast of fire at him, fully expecting it to send him flying. Marcus is engulfed in flames and sent flying backward, but he's just as immortal as she is, so a little fire isn't going to be enough to end him. Machina completely transforms and steps out of the house to face him because she already knows he's up to no good. Before the fight begins, Machina disconnects her familia from the network so Marcus won't be able to access it. After that, the two of them begin launching magic weapon attacks at each other. It looks like it's been fairly even so far, but then, while Marcus is distracted, Machina gets in close and grabs onto one of his arms, causing it to explode and come off entirely. She managed to catch Marcus off guard with that one, but a few seconds later, he had already regenerated his arm. Marcus quickly raises his hand, and with a dark chant, he casts a bloody sword rain, sending sharp blades falling from the sky. The attack causes a huge explosion that shakes everything around them. But thanks to the shield Machina set up, she stays completely safe, untouched by the blast. Unfortunately, her house isn't as lucky. It's now damaged beyond repair, and since she doesn't have fire insurance, she'll have to deal with the mess. As the smoke fills the air, Marcus's secretary jumps out from behind it, aiming to strike Machina with a surprise attack. However, Machina is too fast, and before the secretary can land a hit, she slashes through nothing but an illusion, leaving the secretary to slice the empty air in front of her, confused and angry. Machina had expected Marcus to be too cowardly to come alone, so she prepares a spell to burn the secretary to ash. However, before she can complete it, Marcus calls out, "Codebreaker," and all of a sudden, Machina's familia stops working. This leaves Machina disoriented, so the secretary takes advantage of the opening and stabs Machina through the chest while she's distracted. Machina collapses to the ground, and she isn't getting back up anytime soon. Now that the fight is over, the secretary scolds Marcus for acting so recklessly, since Machina could have easily killed her back there, and all this fighting could have been avoided if Marcus had simply disabled Machina's familia from the start. As the two stand over Machina's motionless body, Machina glares at Marcus, but Marcus actually enjoys it because he loves seeing Machina in such a pitiful state. Machina asks him what he did to her, so Marcus explains that he simply shut her familia down. Machina didn't think it would be possible for him to do, since she disconnected her familia from the internet before the fight started, and normally, she would have been right. Marcus has a special familia, a new kind that's way better than the normal ones. All the normal families have a secret way to control them, and as the boss of IHMI, Marcus can control every familia in the city. He can turn them off whenever he wants, so no one can beat him. He's the fastest at casting spells and can shut down anyone else's familia, so he thinks he's the strongest person in the world. But Machina doesn't get why Marcus wants to be the strongest so much. There's nothing good that comes from it. But Marcus has his reasons. He wants to become the new demon lord, and he doesn't intend to achieve that status through brute force like Veltal did. In this era, all you need is information and technology. So if you control those, then you control the world. However, controlling the world from behind the scenes would be too boring for someone like him, so he intends to absolutely dominate the world far more than Veltal ever managed to dominate during his prime. Just then, the secretary reminds Marcus that they didn't schedule any time for a monologue, so they are running late for his next appointment. Marcus decides to wrap things up here quickly, so it's time for Machina to become fuel for the immortal furnace. By the time Veltal and Takahashi return home, they find the entire place destroyed, with no traces of Machina whatsoever. All that's left is a burnt game controller. Veltol is really sad because Machina was his best friend. He's so upset that Takahashi has to ask if he's okay. They know they need to do something, so Veltol asks what happened. People online are saying there was an explosion, but no one really knows what happened. Veltol wishes he could find Machina, but they can't call her. So Takahashi tries to find another way to locate her. It's going to involve the drones. Since this place is a slum, there aren't a lot of security drones passing through, but there are a lot of delivery drones, and those drones have cameras on them. So all she needs to do is hack into their systems and take a look at the video data. Within a few moments, Takahashi gains access to the drone systems, and from the video feed, they can see the battle that took place here, and that Marcus was the one behind it. They can't tell what Marcus is saying, but after defeating Machina, he and his secretary take her and drive to a restricted section of the city reactor. This means Marcus wants to use Machina's power to run the city. Veltol thanks Takahashi and starts going to the reactor. But Takahashi tells him to stop and think. She understands why he wants to save Machina, but the reactor is very safe. There are many robots guarding it, so Veltol can't go alone. Takahashi can help him get there, but she's not a good fighter. They need someone strong to help. Veltol doesn't have any friends left, but he can think of one person who might help. Veltol later goes to meet with Graham, and at first, Graham wants nothing to do with him. But when he sees the proud Veltol kneel before him and ask for help, he decides to at least hear him out. Veltol explains everything he has learned about the city's Aether reactor, and Graham, who always suspected that something wrong was going on there, is now absolutely appalled by the despicable nature of the project. Veltol pleads with Graham to assist him in storming the reactor because he knows he cannot save Machina as he is right now. But Graham seems more annoyed than sympathetic. Veltol's subordinates killed Graham's family. Veltol himself waged dozens of wars and killed millions of people, and now he is bowing his head to his sworn enemy just to save the life of one immortal woman. He finds this to be utterly shameless. Graham does not like the fact that this city is built upon the deaths of innocent people, but at the same time, that reactor is the heart of this city. So if he were to agree to help Veltol destroy it, then the entire city would be plunged into darkness, and the lives of millions of people would be ruined. Veltol asks Graham if he really believes Veltol is willing to ruin everyone's lives just to save one person. But Veltol laughs, not taking the idea seriously. He's not a fool. He's carefully thought through all the consequences of his actions. He isn't just trying to save Machina. He wants to fix the problems in the city too. But right now, he doesn't have the power or the allies to make that happen, so he has no choice but to ask for help from someone he used to call an enemy. Hearing the confidence in Veltol's voice, Graham stands up, feeling like a hero again. However, he makes it very clear that he's not doing this to help Veltol. He hasn't forgiven the terrible things Veltol did centuries ago, and he still remembers every one of them. But there's a kidnapped woman whose soul is about to be burnt, so he agrees to temporarily join forces for the sake of justice, although it still feels strange to be teaming up with the Demon Lord. A little while later, Takahashi manages to find a way for the two of them to get into the reactor without having to go through the restricted area. She leads them to a hidden entrance. Apparently, this was used to transport all the materials that were used to build the reactor, but even if this path will eventually lead them to the reactor. Veltol says they don't have enough time to clear a maze like this. On the other hand, Graham thinks it will be child's play to clear this maze since he has done it so many times in the past. He casts a spell called auto mapping, and within a few seconds, the detailed map of the maze begins to appear in his hand. Veltol has never seen a spell like this before, so Graham explains that it's a unique one he came up with during his time as an adventurer. But that just makes Veltol angry because he put a lot of effort into building those dungeons back in the day, and it turns out Graham was just cheating his way through it. He accuses Graham of having no pride as an adventurer, but Graham says an adventurer's pride has nothing to do with this since his goal is always to get through dungeons as quickly as possible. Graham doesn't care if Veltol's traps and tricks end up being pointless because he has a map to guide them. Takahashi, who's getting really tired of all their arguing, shouts at them to stop and focus on the mission because they still need to save Machina. Hearing this, both Graham and Veltol realize they've been acting immature and childish, so they quickly apologize to Takahashi and promise to take things seriously from now on. After a little while, Graham finishes making the map, and with it, they'll be able to navigate through the maze without getting lost. Veltol asks if Graham is sure they can trust the map, and Graham assures him that they can. He explains that his mapping magic can also sense traps and enemies, making the map even more useful. But this maze doesn't seem to have any security measures, so it should be fine for them to take the shortest path to the reactor. As the two of them head towards the reactor, Veltol calls Takahashi to apologize again for his outburst earlier. Takahashi is still a little pissed about it, but as long as Veltol stays on task from now on, she's willing to overlook it. He asks her how her end of the plan is going so far, and she says she's making steady progress, but what she's working on will take a lot of time to get ready, so she's not sure if she will be able to get it done by the time the two of them make it down to the reactor room. If she ends up needing more time, Veltol and Graham are going to have to keep the enemies busy for a while to compensate, and Veltol understands that. As they descend, the ambient aether becomes more and more dense, and communication with Takahashi gets choppy. So before she gets cut off, she tells him she will finish making the preparations. Veltol takes a deep breath to prepare himself for what lies ahead, and Graham comments that he can tell that Veltol has grown stronger than he was in the past. Veltol doesn't know what he's talking about since he is clearly nowhere near the strength he had during his prime. But that's not what Graham is talking about. Veltol manages to bow his head to his enemy in order to save Machina, even though the old Veltol would have let her burn before doing something like that. This shows just how much Veltol has changed and how much stronger his character has become. If he had been like this years ago when they faced each other, things might have turned out very differently. As the lift reaches its destination, Veltol and Graham step out and are met by Marcus's secretary, who has been waiting for them. She knew they would come because Marcus had expected Veltol to show up eventually. Suddenly, we see Machina wake up in the aether reactor. She looks around and sees herself bound in chains. As she fully opens her eyes, she's greeted by none other than Marcus, indicating that she's been kidnapped by him. Veltol and Graham step into an elevator that takes them to the immortal furnace. As they ride, they notice the ether density is changing, and this causes their signal with Takahashi to be lost. Taking advantage of this, Graham decides it's the perfect time for a heart-to-heart with his old enemy. He starts by saying that Veltol has gotten stronger over time. Veltol, however, is not in the mood for compliments, and he asks, "When did you learn sarcasm?" He feels weak at that moment, and it's clear that he is not in his best shape. Graham replies that he isn't talking about physical strength. Instead, he points out that he's referring to the strength of Veltol's character. Graham explains that only someone strong in their heart would be able to bow to others if it meant saving their underlings. This shows that Veltol has grown in more ways than one, even if it's hard for him to admit. He believes that Veltol is much different now than he was during their final battle, and that change is a good one. Soon, the elevator stops at its final destination, and as Veltol and Graham head inside the furnace building, they find Marcus' secretary waiting for them. Meanwhile, Machina is in the furnace room with her hands tied, and Marcus stands in front of her, asking, why is she so upset when she just got to meet an old friend? Machina glares at Marcus and curses him, angrily telling him that someone like him, a traitor, has no right to call her his friend. But Marcus doesn't seem bothered by her words. He casually explains that when Veltol was revived, he had his men search for information. To his surprise, he discovered that Machina was still alive. With a smirk, he then tells her that she's standing in front of the immortal furnace right now. He explains that this furnace uses special ritual magic to turn the souls of immortals into ether, which then powers the reactor that keeps the entire city running. Machina takes a moment to absorb what Marcus has said, and as the weight of his words hits her, her anger erupts. She can hardly believe what she's hearing, and her fury starts to grow uncontrollably. Her hair turns red as she releases a vast amount of magic power despite her restraints, but Marcus blocks it all with a barrier. He tells Machina that immortals can't die even if their body is destroyed, but this machine destroys their soul itself. That means once they are thrown into it, they die once and for all. He then reveals that the first immortal he threw into the furnace was none other than Zenlal, one of the 6 dark peers. Machina feels a wave of horror and outrage wash over her, her anger building as she vows to kill Marcus no matter what it takes. She swears she will make him pay for what he has done, but Marcus calmly responds, telling her that she won't have the chance to do anything because she is going to be used as fuel for the immortal furnace, a way to help the city grow and thrive. Meanwhile, back at the entrance to the building, Kinohara, the secretary, is busy holding off Veltol and Graham. She watches them closely, surprised by the sight of the demon lord himself showing up. What's even more shocking to her is that he isn't alone. He has brought the hero with him. As they face off, Graham turns to Veltol and tells him to go ahead and handle things inside. He will stay behind to hold Kinohara back and make sure she doesn't follow them. Even though he is past his prime, he can easily handle a woman who should be wielding a kitchen knife instead of a sword. Veltol tells this misogynistic idiot to not be overconfident because Kinohara might be on the level of Zenlul in terms of her swordsmanship, and Graham confidently says that it will be child's play in that case as he draws his rusted sword. Kinohara takes offense to that, and Graham says that he humbled Zenlul in a sword duel, so she should not be much more difficult to beat either. Kinohara just says, "Okay, boomer," and then swiftly moves behind Graham, drawing her sword out and attacking him in the same motion. Graham manages to block Kinohara's attack, and in that moment, Veltol seizes the opportunity to dash inside the building. Kinohara tries to chase after him, but before she can, Graham quickly steps in front of her, blocking her path. With a swift swing of his sword, he pushes her back, forcing her to pause. Veltol, already making his way to the next part of their mission, calls out to Graham, telling him not to die in this fight as he leaps off the edge of the building. Kinohara, not backing down, looks at Graham with determination and says that his time has long passed. She promises that she will make him a thing of the past, just like the rest of his era. She suddenly activates a spell that is pretty much like domain expansion, and while Graham is blinded by the light, Kinohara suddenly attacks him, sending him crashing into the wall behind. He is unharmed by that attack and finds that Kinohara is suddenly wearing cool white armor. Graham realizes that it is a Maginot Gear, and Kinohara affirms, saying that their company is working on the next-gen Maginot Gear. Not only is it much smaller and lighter than the previous generation mecha armor, but it is also more powerful and efficient too. Graham has had enough of her sales pitch, but then he suddenly notices that his hands are trembling after he took the hit from Kinohara earlier. Kinohara attacks Graham and pushes him off the building. She says he'll be good test data for new robot suits. Graham tells her to stop talking. Kinohara says his weapons and team are old, but hers are new. Graham tells her to talk after she wins. Kinohara attacks him with lightning, but he blocks it. He suddenly notices a pattern in her attack because she sheaths her sword after the attack, and the white lightning vanishes. As she draws her sword again, the lightning returns, and this time, Graham easily blocks her attack. He says that technology has really evolved a lot from the last time he fought, but it is not enough to defeat him. He kicks Kinohara away, and then remarks that he has seen that she needs to sheath her sword between each attack to activate her power. She says he's good at noticing things, but he needs more than that to win. She charges at him again. Graham keeps moving backward and blocking her attacks. Kinohara changes her strategy and attacks from behind, but he blocks that too. He sees a chance when her sword hits the ground and steps on it to stop her. After that, he uses an earth-based spell to attack her with rock spikes, but she slashes through them and says that this is useless against her. Graham immediately uses ice magic to freeze her, but Kinohara melts that off easily too. She tells him that all his attacks are useless, but he just leaps at her and swings his sword with full power. Kinohara blocks Graham's attack, but he hits her with a fireball. Even though she's hit hard, her armor is still okay. Graham says his old tricks still work, even on her fancy new suit. Kinohara gets angry and attacks him again. This time, Graham hits her. Kinohara gets ready to use her strongest attack and says Graham's old sword won't stop her. Graham tells her that his sword may be rusty right now, but as long as there is someone who needs him to be the hero, it will shine once again. He calls his sword to awaken from its sleep, and one by one, the magic seals on it come undone, revealing its true golden form. Graham tells Kinohara to witness his power, which has defeated even the Demon King, and she charges at him, still confident that she can win. Graham simply activates the golden power of his sword and sends a powerful slash towards her. The entire place is filled with a golden blaze, and when it ends, Graham's sword has lost its power and the golden glow in front of him. Kinohara is on her knees, and he remarks that her armor is really amazing because it withstood a blow from him. Kinohara's armor is gone, and she's hurt. She asks Graham why she lost. He tells her to ask why he won. She says it's the same thing, but he says he won because he's more experienced. He feels good about being a hero again. Kinohara asks if he should go help Veltol. Graham says Veltol will be fine, but Kinohara says Veltol can't beat Marcus. She says Marcus is very strong and Belal can't fight him without his team, and even she can't without her robot suit. Graham just laughs at this and tells Kinohara that she is underestimating the Demon Lord if she thinks he went after Marcus without a plan. He then suddenly remembers that he is probably the only living person in the world who has seen Belle's trump card, and if Marcus sees it, he will probably piss his pants and cry like a little. Kinohara doesn't understand what Graham means, but he assures her that Veltol will win the fight. She isn't happy with his answer and then asks if he plans to kill her. Graham replies that there's no need for that, as she's in no condition to fight. His only job, he says, is to make sure Beale can get to his girl. Suddenly, someone attacks them from above. Graham reacts quickly, noticing the attack just in time. He creates a magic barrier, shielding himself and Kinohara from the strike. As the mechas descend, Kinohara is shocked to realize that they belong to her company. Graham realizes that they are trying to get rid of them both, and he gets up to fight them and save the day yet again. Meanwhile, in the furnace room, Marcus is strangling Machina right next to the furnace. Marcus says that all he has to do is drop her, and the immortal furnace will take care of the rest, turning her into energy that will power the city. Without hesitation, he releases her, and as Machina falls toward the furnace, she starts thinking about Veltol. She regrets never telling him that she loves him, wondering if it's too late. Just as she falls, a dark, shadowy mass suddenly appears from above and swoops down, catching her before she hits the furnace. Machina blinks in surprise as she opens her eyes, only to find herself in Belle's arms. He tells her softly that he's here to save her, reassuring her that she's safe now. He throws Machina into the furnace, watching with a smug grin as she plummets toward her fiery end. But the only thing racing through her mind isn't her impending doom. It's that she'll never get to stand by Velvet's side again. Typical. Right before she hits the inferno, though, a cloud of black smoke rushes down from nowhere like some dramatic plot twist. It swoops in, catches her mid-fall, and zooms back up to the platform faster than she can process what just happened. As she blinks her eyes open, she finds Velvet standing over her, looking like he just had the most casual stroll through the underworld. Guess he's here to save the day after all. No big deal. He turns to face Marcus, and Marcus is visibly annoyed by Velvet's presence, but he decides to pretend to be civil for a little while and mentions that he's been watching Velvet's streams lately, so he congratulates him for gaining 1 million subscribers. Velvet stands there, stone-faced, refusing to waste time on pointless banter. He's not about to get bogged down with small talk, but hey, he's fair, so he asks Marcus if he has any justifiable reason for attacking Machina and burning the souls of countless immortals. Marcus, of course, puffs out his chest like a peacock and declares he doesn't owe Velvet any explanations. Fine,